Now, turmoil in the Middle East, of course, between Israel and the Palestinians is long simmering, punctuated by clashes, uprisings, and wars like the one we are seeing unfold right now.
Yeah, but of course, the two sides that have been at this for a long time don't see an end to this violence anytime soon. And their animosity dates back long before the late 1940s when Israel first became a state. The current map, though, dates back to 1967 when Israel captured the Gaza Strip from Egypt and began to occupy the region. We should point out what you're looking at in front of you is an area of about 2 million Palestinians. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world, and that complicates the picture when it comes to avoiding civilian casualties. Now, the militant Islamist group that governs the territory is Hamas. They were formed in 1987. Hamas is an acronym that means Islamic Resistance Movement. It's backed by Iran. It's listed as a terrorist organization by the United States, by the EU, as well as, obviously, Israel. Hamas does consider Israel an illegitimate state, and they've long fought Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank.
And then back in 2005, when Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, Hamas eventually took over and by 2007 was in full control of the territory, as they still are today. That led to Israel and Egypt, the country to the west, to impose a strict blockade on Gaza, which still exists to this day. I want to bring in Michael Oren, who is a former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us at such an important moment. We're watching these live pictures from Gaza. We've seen both rockets flying into Israel, presumably fired by militants. We've also seen strikes by the Israeli side into Gaza. I want to ask you what we were just talking about with our correspondent, Nick Robertson. He has been seeing a massing of forces, of equipment, of tanks. Do you have a sense that a ground invasion by Israel into Gaza is imminent?
Well, good to be with you, and thank you for that summary of the history of Hamas. Just two very important points before I get to your question. One is, for Israelis, and not just for Israelis, barbarians who shoot 260 young people at a rave concert, who put children in cages, who parade women naked through the streets of Gaza, who go into houses and take out families and shoot. These are not militants. These are not fighters. These are terrorists. And it's important to state that. I can also say that I was the deputy to the prime minister, a member of Knesset, and I was in charge of Gaza. I was in charge of that blockade. And it's important to say that the blockade was never a blockade of food, never a blockade of medicine. It was solely a blockade of materials that can be used for armaments or had a dual use. It could be used to make a tunnel and cement or even a 2x4, but never food, right. Never medicine, never any other essentials for life. It's important to state this. This was a military blockade, not a civilian blockade. As for your question, the answer, I think, unfortunately, is yes. This is now the fifth round of our fighting with Hamas. Every single round has ended in basically a return to the status quo ante. The Hamas or Islamic Jihad, these two organizations, these two terrorist organizations in Gaza fire thousands of rockets at us. We fire back with our Air Force. There's a ceasefire, and we go back to that status quo ante. I think that is no longer possible, and I think, though I'm not a spokesman for the Israeli government, I think I do represent Israeli public opinion in saying that Israeli people are unwilling to go back to what was. We can never allow Hamas to attack us in this egregious, barbarous way again. And it will almost inescapably involve ground action, which will be very complicated. Certainly because of the density of the population of Gaza, because of the fact that Hamas will not only be using its own population, Palestinian population, as human shields, they'll be using our hostages as human shields. And then it raises the specter of the possibility of a multi-front war. As I'm talking to you now, the reports of fighting on the northern front as well. So it is not an easy decision for Israeli leaders, but I think right now, and given the state of Israeli public opinion, it's inescapable.
Ambassador Oren, we're just getting word that the death toll on the Israeli side has gone up to 900 due to these Hamas attacks. That is a significant increase from the previous figure. I also want to ask you about these hostages that Hamas is holding. We've just gotten word that Hamas has warned that they will execute civilian hostages if Israel targets people in Gaza without warning. Do you have any sense of what both Israel and the international community, including America, including the U.S., because we understand there's a good chance that our Americans are among the hostages, what they might be doing to get those hostages out?
Okay. First of all, as for the casualties, 900, understand that in American terms, proportionally, we're talking about 13, 14 times the number of casualties and deaths that America experienced on 9/11. Something the equivalent of 35,000, 40,000 Americans would have been killed in Israeli terms. And the hostages, probably over 100 hostages. We're talking about, in American terms, thousands of hostages, and probably upwards of 100,000 proportionally casualties for the United States. So imagine the immensity of the pain and the cost of this egregious attack by Hamas on our civilians. Just unspeakable. What we can do about the hostages, Israel will be doing its utmost together with our allies, with the United States and other democratic allies in the world, to try to locate them through technological means. We have special forces who are specially trained to rescue hostages in very difficult situations. A number of these units have been operating in releasing hostages from the various farms and settlements surrounding Gaza, because Hamas terrorists took a number of hostages in those settlements, and they were successfully released. We're talking about the hostages who were dragged into the Gaza Strip and tortured and beaten there. Israel will do its utmost to try to locate them and to send the forces necessary to liberate them.
All right, Ambassador Michael Oren, we do have to leave it there. And as we leave you, we continue to see the sky over Gaza lighting up. There certainly is a sense that this is just the very beginning of what could be a long and deadly conflict. Ambassador Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, thanks very much.